Welcome along to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
So today we're diving into something I think a lot of people grapple with. Learning English effectively, but specifically doing it alone.
Yeah, that solo journey. It can be tough. You don't have that built-in structure of a class or, instant feedback from a tutor.
Exactly, and maybe private tutoring isn't an option financially or logistically. Plus you go online and it's just overwhelming, right? The sheer amount of resources.
Oh, absolutely. Analysis paralysis is real. Where do you even start?
So our mission for this deep dive is to cut through some of that noise. We want to pull out some really practical, genuinely actionable tips for you if you're learning English by yourself to actually see some fast improvement.
Sounds good. Practical is key.
Before we really get into the weeds, though, if you find this chat helpful, please do hit subscribe. It really helps us out.
Definitely.
Okay, so the inspiration for today's conversation comes mainly from a YouTube video by Thiago from English with Thiago. The video is called How to Study English Alone and Still Improve Fast.
Right. I know his stuff. He learned English largely on his own, didn't he? Through trial and error.
That's the impression I get, yeah. Lots of self-experimentation. So we're basically going to unpack some of his key advice, try and give you a bit of a roadmap based on what worked for him.
Makes sense. Learn from those who've walked the path.
So where does he suggest starting? Well, the very first thing he emphasizes is maybe not what you'd expect. It's about taking stock of your routine.
Yeah.
A really honest look.
The reality check. That's fundamental, isn't it? Before you even think about what to study, you need to figure out when and how it fits into your actual life.
Exactly. He says you need to anchor your learning in the reality of your day-to-day. So think about it. What does your typical day look like? Are you working 9 to 5, studying full-time?
Maybe juggling family responsibilities, kids, commuting, all that stuff eats into your time and energy.
Right. He poses these questions for you, the listener, to really consider. What's your main thing right now? Work, study, both. And what's your home life like? Living alone with a partner.
You kids. Because these aren't just minor details. They massively impact how much genuinely free time you have. And not just time, but mental bandwidth too.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's not just about finding empty slots on a calendar. It's about finding slots where you actually have the focus to learn.
So it's about being realistic. You might want to study 2 hours every night after work, but if you're exhausted and have dinner to make and chores to do, is that actually going to happen consistently?
Probably not. And then you feel guilty or frustrated, which isn't helpful. So it's about identifying those truly feasible pockets. Maybe it's 20 minutes on your commute, maybe 15 minutes during your lunch break.
Or maybe it is an hour in the evening, but only 3 times a week. The key word Thiago uses, and it's crucial, is realistic. What can you actually commit to, day in, day out, or week in, week out?
And that leads directly into his next big point, which is consistency. He absolutely hammers this home.
Yeah, you hear this a lot in language learning advice, and for good reason.
He argues that consistent effort, even if it's for a really short time, he mentions like 10 or 15 minutes, is way more valuable in the long run than trying to do these huge marathon study sessions once in a blue moon.
Totally agree. It's about building a habit, making English part of your daily rhythm, even if it's just a small part. That regular exposure keeps the language alive in your brain.
It prevents that feeling of starting over every time, doesn't it? If you only study once a week, you spend the first half hour just trying to remember what you did last time.
Exactly. Whereas 15 minutes every day, you're constantly reinforcing things. It's like compound interest for your brain. Small, regular deposits add up significantly over time.
I like that analogy, compound interest. So don't beat yourself up if you can only find 15 minutes. The key is to actually do it consistently.
Precisely. Find that realistic slot and then protect it. Make it a non-negotiable part of your day as much as possible.
Okay, so step 1, realistic assessment of your time. Step 2, prioritize consistency over duration.
Got it.
Now, once you've carved out that time, what should you actually do with it? Especially if you're busy. This is where Thiago brings in the concept of input.
Yes, the foundation.
He calls listening and reading the bread and butter of English fluency. Now, that's an idiom, bread and butter. Could you unpack that a bit? What does it really signify here?
Sure. So your bread and butter is usually your main source of income, the thing that sustains you. In this context, Thiago's using it to mean the most essential, fundamental activity for building fluency.
The core ingredient.
Exactly. It's the primary way you absorb the language, how words sound, how sentences are structured, vocabulary and context, natural rhythm, idioms, phrasal verbs, all of it. You take it in through your ears and eyes.
So without that constant feeding of input, it's hard to expect good stuff to come out later, like speaking or writing.
Precisely. You need the raw materials. You need to fill the tank before you can drive the car. Input fuels output.
And he really emphasizes doing this daily, doesn't he? Regardless of how much time you have.
Yeah, that links back to the consistency point. Even on your busiest days, try to get some English input. Listen to a song a couple of times. Read a short news headline in the first paragraph. Listen to a 2-minute podcast clip.
Just keep that connection alive.
Keep the connection alive. Even that small dose helps maintain momentum and keeps your brain processing English subconsciously.
Now, he does mention output speaking and writing and acknowledges they're important. Of course they are. But he seems to suggest that if time is really tight, input should be the priority for a solo learner. Why that prioritization?
Well, think about it. On a day you have only 15 minutes, you can definitely get some quality listening or reading done. You can absorb quite a bit.
Right.
Trying to structure a meaningful speaking or writing practice in just 15 minutes, especially alone, can be trickier and maybe less efficient in terms of pure language acquisition. You can always consume input passively or actively.
Okay, so input is more flexible, more easily integrated into small time slots.
I think that's part of it. And also, even when you're just listening or reading, you are preparing yourself for future output. You're building that internal database of language that you'll draw on when you do speak or write.
So on busy days, focus on topping up the tank with input. On days with more time, you can then practice driving the car, the output.
That's a good way to put it. Input is always valuable, always building that foundation.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense strategically. So daily input is key. Now let's get into some specific techniques he recommends. The third tip is one that sounds simple, maybe even a bit obvious, but he advocates strongly for it. Reading texts aloud.
Yeah. This is a really practical one, especially for solo learners who might not get much chance to actually, vocalize English.
Why is it so beneficial? I mean, you can read silently, right? Why the emphasis on reading out loud?
Well, it does a few things. Firstly, it physically connects the written word to the spoken word. You're engaging your mouth, your tongue, your vocal cords, the actual mechanics of speaking.
Okay, activating the speech muscles.
Exactly. And secondly, it highlights the difference between how you think a word sounds when you read it silently in your head and how it actually sounds when you say it.
He mentioned that specifically the potential disconnect between your internal reading voice and your actual spoken pronunciation. Could you elaborate on that? Why does that happen?
Well, when you read silently, your brain is incredibly efficient. It can recognize words very quickly, sometimes skipping over phonetic details or making assumptions based on spelling patterns that might not be accurate for English pronunciation, which is notoriously tricky.
Right. English spelling is not always helpful for pronunciation.
Not always, no. So you might see a word like though or through and think you know how it sounds, but when you're forced to actually articulate it out loud, you might stumble or realize you weren't quite sure. Reading aloud forces you to confront the actual sounds.
So it's like an instant pronunciation check done by yourself for yourself.
Pretty much. It helps train your ear to listen critically to your own speech, and it helps train your mouth to produce the sounds more accurately. It's linking the visual, the auditory, and the kinesthetic, the muscle movement.
That's a powerful combination.
Yeah.
And he suggests a neat little trick to enhance this. Imagine you're reading to an audience. How does that help?
It adds a layer of intentionality, I think. If you're just mumbling to yourself, you might not focus much on clarity or intonation. But if you imagine you have listeners, even imaginary ones, you'll likely try harder to be clear, to use appropriate pauses, to vary your tone a bit.
You sort of perform it more.
Exactly. You become more conscious of how it sounds to someone else. It encourages better enunciation and makes the practice more engaging, potentially. It moves it from just reciting words to actual communication practice, even if the audience is just in your head.
And he also makes the point that this skill, reading aloud clearly, isn't just useful for English. It's valuable in your native language too, right? For presentations, meetings, whatever.
Absolutely. Being able to articulate clearly and confidently is a transferable skill. Practicing it in English can actually strengthen your general communication abilities overall.
Good point. Okay, so reading aloud engages speech muscles, checks pronunciation, improves flow if you imagine an audience. Solid tip. Let's move on to writing. Thiago's advice here is also quite specific. Write longhand, by hand, not typing.
Yeah, this one definitely goes against the grain of our digital age, doesn't it? Everyone types everything now.
Right. So why push for pen and paper? It seems slower? Less efficient, maybe.
It is slower, and that might actually be part of the benefit, but the
Yeah.
main reason he advocates for it, and he references research here, is about brain activity.
Okay, tell me more.
He mentioned the study, I think it was in Frontiers in Psychology, that basically found that the physical act of forming letters by hand activates more areas of the brain compared to just pressing keys on a keyboard.
Really? Significantly more.
Apparently so. He quotes one of the researchers saying, handwriting activates almost the whole brain. Typing, on the other hand, showed much more limited neural activity in their studies.
Wow. Almost the whole brain.
Yeah.
That's quite a difference. So what does that increased brain activity actually do for language learning?
Well, the theory is that the complex motor control involved in handwriting, combined with the visual recognition of the letters you're forming, creates stronger memory traces. You're engaging more senses, more neural pathways.
So it helps things stick better, like spelling, vocabulary.
That seems to be the idea. Better recall for spelling, because you're physically tracing the shape of the word. Deeper processing of vocabulary and grammar structures, because the slower pace allows for more thorough mental engagement. Each handwritten letter is also unique, unlike uniform-type characters, which might aid memory too.
It's a more embodied way of learning, maybe. More physical connection.
That's a good way to describe it. It's more active, less passive than typing can sometimes feel.
And he connects this directly to the practice of copying things out longhand, like grammar explanations from a textbook or example sentences.
Yeah, instead of just reading a rule and maybe typing out an example, he suggests physically writing it down. That process of transcription, by hand, forces you to slow down and really process the structure, the word order, the verb endings, whatever it is.
It makes you pay closer attention, I guess.
Definitely. You can't just skim when you're writing by hand. It demands more focus, and that deeper focus seems to lead to better retention and internalization of the language patterns.
Okay, so it's about deeper processing and memory enhancement through increased brain activity. And he doesn't just suggest copying grammar rules, right? He talks about practical, everyday writing, too.
Right. He suggests integrating it into your life. Keep a journal, but write it in English, by hand. Make your shopping list in English, by hand. Write out notes or summaries of things you've learned.
Little things like that.
Exactly. Make it a normal way of interacting with the language. It makes English feel less like a subject you study and more like a tool you actually use in your daily life. Plus, you're getting that handwriting benefit consistently.
Okay, handwriting for deeper learning. Got it. Next up, Thiago talks about something we kind of touched on with input. Leveraging media.
Ah, the fun stuff. Movies, TV shows, podcasts.
Music, TED Talks, interviews, documentaries. But the list is endless now, isn't it? He makes the point that learners today have such an advantage compared to, say, 20 or 30 years ago.
Oh, massively. The accessibility of authentic English content is just incredible. Back then, you might have had textbooks, maybe some tapes, perhaps shortwave radio if you were lucky, or waiting for a specific show on TV. Now, it's literally at your fingertips, 24/7.
An embarrassment of riches, really.
Yeah.
But just having access isn't enough, right? You need
Yeah.
to use it effectively. He gives 3 key strategies here. The first one is multiple consumption,
Right. Watching or listening to the same thing more than once.
which, again, might seem counterintuitive when there's so much new stuff constantly available. Why rewatch that movie or re-listen to that podcast episode?
Because your understanding deepens with each exposure. The first time, you're likely just trying to follow the plot or the main idea. You'll miss a lot of the nuances.
Okay.
The second time, you already know what happens, so you can focus more on the language itself. You might pick up on vocabulary you missed, notice how a particular phrase was used, understand a joke you didn't get before, or grasp a subtle grammatical point.
Peeling back the layers like an onion.
Exactly like an onion. Subsequent viewings or listenings allow you to catch finer details, appreciate the rhythm and flow more, maybe even notice pronunciation points. It moves you from basic comprehension to much deeper familiarity and internalization.
He even suggested, cheekily, that listeners might benefit from listening to this deep dive more than once.
Well, why not? Repetition aids memory. And he also suggests varying how you consume it, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, watch a scene with English subtitles first to catch the words. Then watch it again without subtitles to rely on your listening. Then maybe again with subtitles in your native language if you're really struggling. Or even just have the audio playing in the background while you're doing chores.
Each method targets slightly different skills. Subtitles help link sound and spelling. No subtitles forces pure listening comprehension. Background listening tunes your ear to the general rhythm and intonation, the music of the language. It's about deliberate engagement with one piece of content over a period.
Okay, so repeat and vary the method. That's strategy 1. His second point about media is about being strategic with clip length.
Ah, right. The difference between using long-form content versus short clips.
What's the distinction he's making there?
Well, longer content like a full movie, a whole TV episode, a long podcast is great for general immersion, for getting lost in the story, for extensive listening practice. You're absorbing the language more naturally over a sustained period.
Just soaking it in.
Exactly. But for deliberate study, where you want to really analyze the language, maybe take notes, look things up, practice pronunciation, shorter clips are often much more manageable.
Like just a few minutes. A single scene from a movie, maybe.
Precisely. Or a 3-minute segment of a podcast. It allows you to focus intensely without getting overwhelmed. You can pause, rewind, listen again and again, transcribe if you want, look up every word in that small segment if needed. It facilitates that deep dive into the specific language being used.
So, long content for general input and enjoyment. Short clips for focused, intensive study. Tailor the length to your goal for that session.
That's the idea. Both have their place, but using short clips for active study can be very productive.
Makes sense. And his third point about media loops, back to something we've already discussed, taking notes. And ideally, you guessed it, longhand notes. Why specifically after consuming media?
It acts as a consolidation tool. After you've watched your short clip, or even after a longer piece, jotting down a quick summary, key takeaways, new vocabulary you noticed, or interesting phrases helps to solidify that information in your memory.
So it forces you to actively recall and process what you just took in.
Exactly. Instead of passively letting it wash over you, you're actively engaging with it one more time through the act of writing. And again, doing it by hand brings those cognitive benefits we talked about, deeper processing, better retention. It makes the learning stickier.
Okay, so repeat viewing, listening, use short clips for study, take handwritten notes.
Yeah.
Got it. Let's shift from screens back to paper for a moment. Books. Thiago is a big advocate for reading books in English.
Yeah, which can feel daunting for learners, especially if they aren't big readers even in their native language.
Right. But he makes it accessible. He suggests starting really small, just 1 page a day.
That's brilliant, I think. It completely lowers the barrier to entry. Anyone can find time to read 1 page, surely. It removes that feeling of, oh God, I have to read this whole thick book.
Takes the pressure off. And the idea is that reading 1 page consistently helps you build the habit of reading in English.
Exactly. It's about habit formation. Once reading a page a day becomes automatic, maybe you'll naturally start reading 2 pages or 3 or for 10 minutes. But starting with that tiny, achievable goal is key to getting the habit established.
Now, what kind of books? He gives some advice on choosing the right level. He suggests picking books where you can understand roughly 50% of the content. Why that specific number?
It seems to be a kind of sweet spot for language acquisition through reading, sometimes called comprehensible input plus a little bit more, I+1. If you understand much less than 60%, say only 30–40%, you'll likely be stopping constantly to look things up, the story won't flow, and you'll just get frustrated and probably give up.
Too hard, too much work.
Right. But if you understand almost everything, say 95–100%, while it might be enjoyable, you're not encountering enough new language to really push your learning forward. You're staying in your comfort zone.
Not enough challenge.
Exactly. So around 60–70% comprehension means you can follow the main story, you can understand the gist of most sentences. But there are still enough new words or unfamiliar structures that you can often guess from context, or that provide that little bit of challenge needed for growth.
Okay, so aim for that zone where it's understandable enough to follow, but challenging enough to learn. And related to this, he strongly advises against stopping to look up every single unknown word.
Yes, this is such important advice and often hard for diligent students to follow. They want to understand everything perfectly.
Understandable impulse, right. You see a word you don't know, you want to know what it means.
Of course. But if you do that for every word, your reading experience becomes incredibly slow and fragmented. You lose the flow of the story, you lose track of the overall meaning, and it just becomes a vocabulary lookup exercise, not really reading.
So what's the alternative? Just guess, skip it.
Focus on the main idea. Try to infer the meaning from the context, the surrounding sentences, the overall situation. If you can understand the gist of the sentence or paragraph, even without knowing that specific word, just keep reading. Often, the meaning will become clearer later, or the word might be repeated in a different context.
Trust the process and focus on comprehension over perfection.
Exactly. You'll absorb a lot of vocabulary almost subconsciously this way. You can always make a quick note of a word that seems really important or keeps popping up and look it up later after you've finished your reading session, but don't interrupt the flow constantly.
That requires a bit of a mindset shift for some learners, I imagine, letting go of the need to know everything immediately.
It does, but it makes reading so much more enjoyable and ultimately more effective for fluency development.
He also gives another really practical tip for choosing books.
Yeah.
Read something you've already read and enjoyed in your own language.
Yeah, that's a classic tip. It's great because you remove one of the main cognitive loads figuring out the plot, the characters, the world. You already know all that.
So all your mental energy can go towards understanding the English itself.
Precisely. You can focus on seeing how ideas you're familiar with are expressed in English. Notice the different vocabulary choices, the sentence structures. It makes the language the focus, not the story comprehension. Plus, it's motivating because you already know you like the book.
Reduces the fear factor significantly. Good tip. And again, he circles back to the idea that the hardest part is just starting and building that reading habit.
Absolutely. Like any habit, the initial phase requires the most discipline. Pushing through that 1 page a day consistently, even when you don't feel like it, is what builds the foundation. Once the habit is there, it becomes much easier, almost automatic.
Consistency, consistency, consistency. It's the recurring theme.
It really is.
Okay, we've covered input listening, reading, media, books. Let's move into the realm of output, specifically speaking. This is often the biggest hurdle for solo learners, isn't it? How do you practice speaking if you don't have anyone to speak to?
Yeah, the classic conundrum. You need to speak to get better at speaking, but who do you speak with?
Thiago tackles this head on. His first suggestion might make some people feel a bit self-conscious initially. Have conversations with yourself.
Yeah, talk to yourself. It sounds a bit weird maybe, but honestly, it's incredibly effective.
Why? What's the benefit of essentially talking to thin air?
Well, it's a completely safe space to practice. There's zero pressure, zero fear of making mistakes or being judged. You can experiment with formulating sentences, try out new vocabulary you've learned, practice responding to imaginary questions.
You're basically activating the language production part of your brain without the social anxiety element.
Exactly. You're getting your mouth moving, you're retrieving vocabulary, you're constructing sentences in English. It's active practice. And he suggests making it concrete by role-playing scenarios.
Right, like ordering food in a restaurant, asking for directions, buying a movie ticket, that sort of thing.
Yeah, imagine the situation vividly. What would you say? What might the other person say? Play both parts. He emphasizes being playful and creative with it. The more you engage your imagination, the more memorable and effective the practice becomes.
It's like rehearsing for real life. So when you actually are in that situation, you've already mentally walked through it in English.
Precisely. It builds familiarity and confidence.
Yeah.
You won't be starting from scratch when you face it for real.
Okay, so self-talk and role-playing.
Yeah.
What else? He also suggests repeating phrases you hear.
Yeah, this is a bit different from just reading aloud. This is about actively listening to authentic English from movies, podcasts, songs, whatever. And when you hear a phrase that sounds useful, natural, or just interesting, repeat it out loud.
Mimicking specific chunks of language.
Exactly. It helps you nail the pronunciation, the intonation, the rhythm of that specific phrase as native speakers use it. You're borrowing their fluency for a moment and trying to internalize it. It's great for picking up collocations and natural-sounding expressions.
So listen actively, identify useful chunks, and repeat them aloud immediately.
Simple but effective.
Then he gets into 2 more specific techniques, shadowing and mimicking. He even uses his own videos as examples for shadowing. Can you break down the difference between these two for us? They sound similar.
They are related but distinct. Mimicking is typically listen, pause, repeat. So you listen to a short chunk of audio, maybe a sentence or two, then you pause the audio and try to repeat exactly what you heard, focusing very carefully on getting the sounds, the stress, the intonation just right.
Okay, so listen then repeat. What about shadowing?
Shadowing is simultaneous. You play the audio and you try to speak along with the speaker in real time, like an echo that's just slightly behind them. You don't pause the audio, you try to keep up.
Wow, okay. That sounds challenging.
It can be, especially at first. Mimicking allows you more time to process and focus on accuracy for each short chunk. Shadowing forces you to focus on the overall flow, rhythm, intonation, and connected speech. How words blend together because you have to keep pace.
So, different goals, really. Mimicking for detailed accuracy, shadowing for overall fluency and rhythm.
That's a good way to summarize it, yeah. Mimicking helps fine-tune your pronunciation of individual sounds and words. Shadowing helps you internalize the musicality and flow of natural spoken English. Both are incredibly valuable for solo practice.
It's like mimicking is working on the individual notes, and shadowing is practicing the whole melody.
Perfect analogy. And doing both regularly can significantly improve your spoken fluency and naturalness, even without a conversation partner.
Okay, those sound like powerful techniques to try. Now, his final major piece of advice for solo learners related to speaking is about recording yourself.
Ah, the moment of truth. Hearing your own voice speaking a foreign language.
It can be cringy, can't it?
Yeah.
A lot of people hate the sound of their own voice, even in their native language. Why does he recommend putting yourself through that?
Because it provides invaluable objective feedback. When you're speaking, you often don't notice your own mistakes or awkward phrasing or pronunciation issues. Your brain kind of filters it out.
You think you sound better than you do, maybe.
We're just different. But when you listen back to a recording, you hear yourself more like how others hear you. You can spot things much more easily. Oh, I mispronounced that word, or my intonation sounds a bit flat there, or I keep using that filler word.
So it builds self-awareness.
Huge self-awareness. It allows you to identify your specific weaknesses and areas that need work. Without that awareness, it's hard to improve deliberately. Recording yourself is like holding up a mirror to your speaking.
And what should you record? Just talking?
He suggests various things. Record yourself reading that text aloud. Record yourself doing one of those role-playing scenarios. Try summarizing something you read or watched. Or even, he suggests, make short video recordings like a vlog entry or a video journal.
Video? Why add the visual element?
That adds another layer. You can see your mouth movements. Are they helping or hindering your pronunciation? You can see your facial expressions, your body language. Are you looking confident? Are there any distracting habits? It gives you a more complete picture of your communication style.
Okay. That might take some courage, but I can see the benefit. Objective feedback for targeted improvement.
Exactly. It's not about judging yourself harshly. It's about gathering data so you can practice more effectively.
Right. So it seems like even learning alone, there are plenty of active, effective strategies you can use across all the skills. It's not just passively reading textbooks.
Not at all. Thiago's advice paints a picture of a very active, engaged solo learner who is constantly experimenting, consuming input, practicing output in creative ways, and using feedback, even self-generated feedback, to improve.
It really empowers the learner to take control, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It puts the keys to progress firmly in your own hands.
Okay, so let's try and quickly pull all those threads together. To recap the main actionable tips from Thiago for learning English effectively on your own and improving fast.
First, get real about your schedule. Analyze your daily life. Find those consistent, feasible pockets of time for study. Even 10-15 minutes counts if it's regular.
Second, prioritize input listening and reading. Make it your daily bread and butter. It's the fuel for everything else.
Third, practice reading texts aloud. Connect the written word to spoken sounds. Work on pronunciation. Maybe imagine an audience to boost clarity.
Fourth, embrace the power of writing by hand. Copy grammar, take notes, journal, make lists, leverage that increased brain activity for better memory.
Fifth, make the most of media. Use multiple consumption watch or listen repeatedly. Use short clips for focused study and long content for immersion. Take handwritten notes to consolidate.
Sixth, build a reading habit with books. Start small, 1 page a day. Choose books around the 60% comprehension mark. Don't stop for every word. Focus on the main idea. Try reading familiar stories.
And seventh, actively practice speaking, even alone. Talk to yourself, role-play scenarios, repeat useful phrases you hear, use mimicking for accuracy and shadowing for flow, and crucially, record yourself speaking, audio and maybe video, to gain self-awareness and identify areas for improvement.
Wow, that's a comprehensive toolkit for the solo learner.
It really is, and the underlying message woven through all of it is consistency. Applying these strategies regularly, making them part of your routine, that's what will lead to the fast improvement Thiago talks about.
It's not about finding one magic bullet, but about consistently applying a range of effective techniques.
Precisely. It's a marathon, not a sprint, but these techniques help make each step of the marathon more effective and hopefully more enjoyable.
Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive. I feel like we've unpacked a lot of genuinely useful strategies for anyone out there trying to master English on their own terms.
Agreed. Lots of practical takeaways.
And now, for that final provocative thought to leave you with. Thinking about all these techniques, the reading aloud, the handwriting, the shadowing, the self-recording, the strategic media use, which One feels like the biggest departure from how you currently learn, but might potentially offer the biggest leap forward if you consistently integrated it.
Or maybe, how could you weave just one or two of these ideas into your existing routine in a small, manageable way starting tomorrow without feeling overwhelmed? Just something to mull over.
Food for thought indeed. If you're aiming to boost your English skills, definitely hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what we've got coming up.
Absolutely. Your support means a lot.
Today, we're jumping into something that's just, well, essential for communicating clearly and feeling confident in English. We're talking about building a really strong vocabulary.
That's right. It's a big topic and kind of intimidating for some learners, maybe.
It can be. But we've gone through a whole load of information, practical advice from places like Oxford Learning, actual experiences people shared over on Reddit, which is always interesting, and even looked into the science of memory from the Good Notes blog and guides on spaced repetition.
So we've got a good mix of expert advice and, real-world perspectives.
Exactly. And our goal here, our mission for this deep dive, is to equip you, the listener, with a whole toolkit of practical, effective strategies, things you can actually use to grow your English vocabulary.
Yeah, the aim is to help you express yourself more precisely, understand conversations and texts more deeply, and just generally feel, more confident using English.
And importantly, without feeling like you're drowning in endless lists of words to memorize. We want this to feel manageable, even, dare I say, engaging for you, the learner.
Right. Think of vocabulary not just as like a list of words you know. It's more like having a richer set of tools.
Tools for what exactly?
Tools for understanding subtle differences in meaning, for saying exactly what you mean, and honestly, for connecting better with people when you're speaking English.
Okay, that makes sense. A richer toolkit. I like that. So where do we start? If someone wants to build this toolkit, what's the first most fundamental step?
Well, pretty much all our sources point towards reading. It sounds simple, maybe even obvious, but its importance really can't be overstated.
Oxford Learning really hammers this home. They talk about reading widely.
Yeah, not just sticking to one type of thing. Books, magazines, newspapers, websites, across different topics. The variety exposes you to different types of language, different word choices.
But it's not just about passively reading, is it? Like letting the words wash over you?
No, not at all. The key is active engagement, noticing words you don't recognize, being curious about them, and crucially, taking that next step to actually look them up and understand their meaning.
Okay, so active reading. And Oxford Learning mentioned something about timing, didn't they? Like how much reading is needed.
They did, and it's quite encouraging, actually. They found that even just 15 minutes of reading each day shows positive results, so it doesn't have to be a massive time commitment initially.
15 minutes. Okay. That sounds doable for most people.
Right. But they also noted that the really significant gains, the biggest improvements, tend to come when you increase that to, say, 30 to 60 minutes a day.
So consistency is key, even with a small amount. But more time generally leads to faster progress. Makes sense.
Exactly. It's about that regular exposure. Your brain starts picking up patterns, seeing words used in different situations. That context is invaluable.
You mentioned context. Reading provides that naturally, right? Seeing a word in a sentence, in a paragraph.
Precisely. You're not just learning a word in isolation, like from a list.
Yeah.
You see how it interacts with other words, what kind of situations it's used in. That gives you so many clues about its meaning and usage.
And for learners who might find authentic news articles or novels a bit daunting at first, there was a mention of a resource, wasn't there? Something like English news and easy articles for students.
Yes, that sounds like a fantastic starting point. Resources like that provide material that's specifically designed for learners, often graded by level.
So you can find something that challenges you a little, but doesn't completely overwhelm you.
Exactly. It helps build confidence and momentum. You encounter new words, but in a context you can mostly understand. And because it's leveled, you'll likely see important vocabulary repeated, which helps reinforce it.
It's like building up gradually. Weight training for your vocabulary muscles.
That's a great analogy, and it's interesting to see this play out in real experiences. That Reddit discussion we looked at had some great examples.
Oh yeah, the one about the Aubrey Maturin books, with all the sailing terms.
Right. The user, almost asleep right now, mentioned reading that series and encountering tons of specific naval vocabulary.
Stuff they probably wouldn't see anywhere else.
Probably not. And they said even if they didn't look up every single term immediately, just seeing them used repeatedly in the context of ships and sailing, well, eventually they started to understand what they meant.
So the brain just kind of pieces it together from the surrounding information.
Exactly. It's that contextual learning in action. Your brain is constantly looking for patterns and making inferences. Of course, looking things up speeds up the process, but there's real value in letting your brain grapple with the context first.
That Reddit thread also showed different approaches people take, didn't it? It wasn't just one method.
No, definitely not. You had some users, like Mom with an Attitude, who were very immediate. See an unknown word, look it up right then, maybe even scribble the definition in the book margin. Very active.
Like tackling it head on.
Yeah. And then you had others, like Resolve Psychological, who preferred a more digital workflow. They might screenshot a definition or add the word to a flashcard app like Anki for review later.
So different strokes for different folks, essentially.
Precisely. It really highlights that the best method is the one that works for you, the one you'll actually stick with. Whether that's instant lookup, highlighting for later, using an app, it depends on your style and habits.
The key takeaway seems to be finding your system and being consistent with it.
Absolutely. Experiment a little. See what feels right and what you can realistically integrate into your reading routine over the long haul.
Okay, so reading is foundational. But just encountering words isn't always enough for them to stick, right? We need to actively do something with them.
Exactly. And this is where strategies for active engagement come in. Oxford Learning is a big proponent of keeping a vocabulary journal.
Right. I remember reading about that. It's not just a list of words, is it?
No, it's more involved. The idea is to dedicate maybe a page or at least a section to each new word you really want to learn. You write down the word, its definition, maybe some example sentences.
And synonyms and antonyms, too, they suggested.
Yes, definitely include synonyms, words with similar meanings, and antonyms, words with opposite meanings. This helps you understand the word's nuances and how it relates to other words you might already know. It builds a richer network of meaning in your brain.
And the physical act of writing it down helps.
It really does. It helps encode the information more deeply than just reading it. And crucially, Oxford Learning stresses the importance of regular review. Going back over your journal entries reinforces the learning and helps move those words into your long-term memory.
So the journal isn't just a place to dump words. It's a tool for active learning and review. Like a personalized dictionary you build yourself.
Precisely. A dynamic tool, not a static list.
Okay, beyond journals, what about technology? Apps are everywhere now. Oxford Learning mentioned a few, didn't they?
They did. Things like Word of the Day apps, Memrise, vocabulary.com, Word Up. There are loads out there.
And what's the main advantage of using apps?
Well, they're often very convenient. You can use them for short bursts of study, like when you're commuting or waiting in line. They make vocabulary practice accessible.
Micro-learning almost.
Exactly. And many of them use gamification points, levels, challenges, which can make learning feel less like a chore and more like, well, a game. It can boost motivation and confidence.
Plus, they often include pronunciation audio and visuals, which you don't always get with just a written list.
That's a great point. Hearing the word pronounced correctly and maybe seeing an image associated with it can really help solidify it in your memory.
Speaking of games, Oxford Learning also mentioned actual word games, like crosswords, Scrabble, Boggle.
Yeah, and these are fantastic because they force you to think about words differently. Not just recalling a definition, but thinking about spelling, how words fit together, finding words within letters.
It's more applied learning, in a way.
Definitely. You're actively manipulating and recalling vocabulary in a fun, contextual way. Crosswords make you think about definitions and synonyms. Scrabble makes you think about word formation and spelling. It's great reinforcement.
Okay, let's talk about a real classic vocabulary tool, flashcards. Both Oxford Learning and the GoodNotes blog mention these. Simple concept, right? Word on one side, definition on the other.
Simple concept, but incredibly powerful when used correctly. The real magic of flashcards lies in how you use them, specifically through active recall.
Active recall. They came up in the GoodNotes blog quite a bit. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Sure. So passive review would be just reading the word and then flipping the card over to read the definition. Active recall is when you look at the word and genuinely try to retrieve the definition from your own memory before you flip the card.
So you're testing yourself, essentially.
Exactly. And that act of trying to retrieve the information, even if you struggle a bit, strengthens the neural pathway associated with that word. It makes the memory stronger and more durable than just passively rereading it.
The GoodNotes blog also had a tip about avoiding multiple choice on flashcards, right?
Yeah, they suggested that if possible, avoid multiple choice answers because that relies more on recognition, just picking the right answer from a list. True active recall is about retrieving the information from scratch without those cues.
Like the difference between recognizing someone's face in a crowd versus being able to describe their face from memory.
That's a perfect analogy. Active recall is the description, recognition is just picking them out.
And we saw some specific flashcard app recommendations too. Anki came up in the Reddit thread.
Yes, Anki is hugely popular, especially among serious language learners. It's known for being very powerful and customizable, and it heavily utilizes spaced repetition, which is another key concept we should talk about.
Right, spaced repetition. But before that, someone else on Reddit mentioned word circle as maybe simpler.
Yeah, Herbicult suggested that. It highlights that there are options. Some people love the deep customization of Anki. Others might prefer something simpler and maybe more intuitive like Word Circle or other apps.
The tool itself isn't the main thing, though.
No, the underlying principle is what matters. Whether it's paper cards you review yourself or a sophisticated app, the core benefit comes from consistently using active recall to test your memory. Find a tool you'll actually use regularly.
Okay, so that brings us neatly to spaced repetition. You mentioned Anki uses it. What exactly is it? It sounds strategic.
It is very strategic. Sources like Sprach Cafe, Busuu, and specific guides on spaced repetition all talk about this. It's not just reviewing often, it's about reviewing at the right time.
The right time. How does that work?
Well, think about how we forget things. You learn something new, and your memory of it is strong initially, but over time, it naturally fades. It's called the forgetting curve.
Okay, yeah, that happens to me all the time.
Right. Spaced repetition systems work with this curve. They schedule your next review of a word for just before you're likely to forget it.
So it catches it just in time.
Exactly. Each time you successfully recall the word just as you're about to forget it, you strengthen that memory trace, and the system pushes the next review further into the future.
So the intervals between reviews get longer over time.
Precisely. You might review a new word tomorrow, then in 3 days, then a week, then 2 weeks, a month, and so on. The system adapts based on how easily you recall the word. If you struggle, you'll see it again sooner. If you know it well, the interval gets longer.
That sounds much more efficient than just randomly reviewing everything all the time.
It is. Busuu explicitly mentions how effective spaced repetition is for vocabulary acquisition. It optimizes your study time for long-term attention, avoiding that feeling of constantly cramming and forgetting. You're reinforcing the memory at the most effective moments.
And there's real science behind this. It's not just a gimmick.
Oh, absolutely. The guides mentioned the cognitive science principles involved. It heavily relies on that active recall we just discussed, and also something called a testing effect.
The testing effect. What's that?
It's the finding, supported by studies like the one by Roediger and Karpike that was referenced, that the act of testing yourself, of trying to retrieve information, isn't just a way to assess learning. It actually improves learning and long-term retention.
So the test itself makes the memory stronger.
Exactly. Every successful retrieval strengthens the memory trace, making it more resistant to forgetting. It's like exercise for your memory pathways.
Wow. So flashcards combined with spaced repetition are like a targeted workout for your vocabulary memory.
That's a great way to think about it. And the guides mention specific apps that implement this, like Anki, which we already discussed, known for its customization.
Right, the one for people who like to tinker.
Yeah, and then they mentioned Heloma as maybe a more user-friendly alternative, possibly with AI features to help personalize the spacing and content even more.
So different tools, but both leveraging these powerful principles of active recall and spaced repetition.
Correct. The choice depends on your preference for customization versus ease of use, but both aim to help you learn more effectively and efficiently.
Okay, this active learning stuff is fascinating, but let's not forget about just soaking up the language, right? Immersive learning.
Absolutely essential, and a really enjoyable way to learn for many people. Oxford Learning brings up watching movies and TV shows in English.
Yeah, that's a popular one. How does that specifically help with vocabulary?
Well, you're hearing words used in natural conversation with authentic pronunciation and intonation. Plus, you have the visual context, the setting, the actions, the characters' expressions, which provides tons of clues to meaning.
So it's learning in context, but with audio and visuals added.
Exactly. And the tip from Oxford Learning is key here. Don't just let it wash over you entirely. If you hear an interesting or unfamiliar word, jot it down. Make a note of it.
And look it up later.
Yes, look it up later. That little bit of active follow-up turns passive viewing into a learning opportunity.
Makes sense. And related to that, listening to podcasts came up too, right?
Definitely. Podcasts are fantastic for vocabulary. Oxford Learning mentions specific ones like the BBC's 6-Minute Vocabulary, Merriam-Webster's Word of the Day, and the Vocab Man. There are also general resources like Learn English and Listen to English with Podcasts.
What's the advantage of podcasts over, say, watching TV?
One big advantage is flexibility. You can listen while you're doing other things, commuting, exercising, cooking. It fits into parts of your day where reading or watching might not be practical.
And you get exposed to a huge range of topics and speakers.
Exactly. You can choose podcasts on subjects that interest you, which keeps you engaged, and you'll hear vocabulary related to all sorts of different fields. Plus, many podcasts designed for learners, like those BBC ones or the resources mentioned, often provide transcripts or vocabulary lists, which is super helpful.
BBC Learning English on YouTube was mentioned too, right? As a broader resource.
Yes, they offer a wealth of material, videos, articles, audio covering vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, all sorts of things. A really valuable resource for learners.
But again, just like with movies, the key is not just passive listening.
Right. Active listening, paying attention to new words, maybe noting them down if you can, thinking about their meaning and context, and perhaps looking them up later if you're still unsure. That active element is what really drives the learning.
Okay, so we need ways to encounter words, reading, listening, watching. And we need ways to actively learn them. Journals, apps, flashcards, spaced repetition. What about the tools for just understanding the basics of a word?
Good point. We shouldn't overlook the fundamentals. Oxford Learning emphasizes the importance of using a good dictionary and thesaurus.
Seems basic, but probably still crucial.
Absolutely. A good dictionary gives you the precise definition, pronunciation, different forms of the word, and example sentences. It's your foundation for understanding.
And the thesaurus?
The thesaurus helps you build connections. It shows you synonyms, similar words, and antonyms, opposite words. This helps you understand the word's specific shade of meaning and how it relates to words you already know. It expands your vocabulary network.
So they work together, dictionary for precision, thesaurus for connections.
Exactly. Essential reference tools, whether they're physical books or digital apps.
Now, Oxford Learning also suggested something more social for learning, joining a book club. How does that fit in?
That's a really interesting suggestion. It combines reading with discussion. So you're encountering new vocabulary in the book itself.
And then you get to talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
You hear how other people interpret the book, how they use vocabulary to discuss it. You might discuss the meaning of specific words or phrases that came up. It adds a layer of social interaction and different perspectives that can really deepen your understanding.
It forces you to articulate your thoughts about the words too, maybe.
Definitely. And you get exposed to how others use language naturally in conversation about a shared topic. It's active and contextual.
What if you can't find a local book club or want something more English-focused?
Well, that's where online communities come in. The source, 13 Ways to Learn English Fast and Effectively, specifically mentioned joining online English learning communities.
What kind of communities are we talking about?
Forums, Facebook groups, dedicated language exchange websites or apps, places where you can connect with native speakers and other learners from around the world.
And the benefit there is practice.
Practice, definitely. You can try using your new vocabulary in messages or discussions, but also exposure. You see how native speakers communicate naturally. You can ask questions, get feedback, and learn from others who are on the same journey. It provides that crucial interaction.
It creates a supportive space to try things out.
Exactly. Peer learning and interaction with native speakers, even online, can be incredibly valuable.
Okay, these are great ways to find and understand words. But the Good Notes blog had some really specific techniques for making information stick during the learning process itself. Active learning strategies.
Yes, they had some excellent practical tips based on cognitive science. One was about note-taking, specifically writing questions while you take notes.
Instead of just copying things down.
Right. As you're learning something new, maybe reading a chapter or listening to our deep dive, you actively formulate questions about the key points. What is the main advantage of X? How does Y work?
And then what?
Then, when you review your notes later, you don't just reread them. You use those questions to prompt yourself to recall the answers from memory. It turns review into an active retrieval session.
Linking back to that active recall idea, they mentioned the Cornell note-taking method.
Yes, the Cornell method actually has a specific column built in precisely for writing these kinds of cue questions alongside your main notes. It encourages this active approach right from the start.
Interesting. What else did Good Notes suggest?
Another simple but powerful one. Stop and summarize. Periodically, as you're reading or listening, just pause and try to summarize the main points you've just covered in your own words.
Without looking at your notes.
Ideally, yes, or just glancing briefly. The act of processing the information and rephrasing it forces you to engage with it more deeply than just passively absorbing it. It helps solidify understanding and makes it easier to recall later.
It's like checking if you really understood it. Cornell notes have a summary section too, right?
They do, typically at the bottom of the page. It reinforces that idea of regularly synthesizing the information.
Okay, what about practice questions? That seems like a direct way to test yourself.
Absolutely. Good notes highlighted incorporating practice questions or even past exam questions if relevant. This is a direct application of the testing effect we talked about.
So doing practice questions isn't just for checking your score, it actually helps you learn.
Yes. Every time you retrieve information to answer a question, you're strengthening that memory. It also helps you apply your knowledge in a format similar to how you might need to use it later.
Got it. Now, this next one sounded a bit counterintuitive. Pre-testing before you revise.
Yeah, it does sound odd, doesn't it? But the research suggests that trying to answer questions about a topic before you properly study it can actually enhance your learning during the study session.
How? Why would that work?
The theory is that it kind of primes your brain. It highlights what you don't know, making you more receptive and attentive when you encounter that information during your actual studying. It helps you focus on the gaps in your knowledge.
So failing a pre-test might actually be good for learning.
In a way, yes. It focuses your attention where it's needed most.
Okay, that's fascinating. What about teaching? I think they mentioned teaching someone else.
Yes, teach a friend who knows nothing about the subject. This is often cited as one of the most effective learning strategies.
Why is teaching so powerful for the teacher?
Because to explain something clearly to someone else, especially a beginner, you have to really understand it yourself. You need to organize the information logically, simplify complex ideas, find analogies.
And if you can't explain it simply.
It probably means you don't understand it well enough yourself. It forces you to confront gaps in your own knowledge and solidify your understanding by articulating it. The blog even joked that teaching an imaginary friend works too.
Huh. Okay, good to know. And finally, they had advice about Google.
Yes, a very modern piece of advice. Stop relying on Google instantly. When you can't recall a word or a fact, resist that immediate urge to search.
Make yourself try to remember first.
Exactly. Really make an effort to retrieve it from your memory. Then, if you're still stuck or want to confirm, use Google to check. But give your brain that chance for active retrieval first.
Otherwise, Google becomes a crutch that prevents your memory from getting stronger.
Precisely. Use it as a verification tool, not an instant answer machine that bypasses the learning process.
These active strategies are great. So you learn the words, you use these techniques to remember them, but then you actually have to use them, right?
Absolutely critical. All the learning in the world doesn't mean much if the words just sit passively in your head. Oxford Learning put it simply: practice, practice, practice.
Use it or lose it, essentially.
Pretty much. You need to actively try to incorporate your new vocabulary into your own speaking and writing. Use the words in conversations, in emails, when you're thinking to yourself.
The more you use them.
The more natural they become. They move from being words you just recognize to words that are part of your active, usable vocabulary. It solidifies the learning like nothing else.
Okay, so practice is key. But sometimes just remembering the word in the first place is the hard part. That's where mnemonics come in, right? Several sources mention these.
Yes, mnemonics are basically memory tricks or techniques. They help you link new, unfamiliar information like a new vocabulary word to something you already know or can easily remember.
How do they work? What kinds are there?
There are lots of types. LiveXP mentioned acronyms like using homes for the Great Lakes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior. That's a common one.
Okay, acronyms. What else?
Acrostics, where the first letter of each word in a sentence cues something else, like every good boy does fine for musical notes.
Yeah.
Rhymes are another type, like 30 days hath September.
Ah, yeah, I know that one.
Visual mnemonics, too, like associating the shape of the letter B with a bed to remember which way it faces compared to D. The key idea, as one source put it, is that our brains are better at remembering stories, emotions, patterns, and images than abstract facts. Mnemonics tap into that.
So you create a link, a hook in your memory.
Exactly. You link the new word to something familiar, vivid, or patterned. It makes the retrieval path much easier to find later.
One source mentioned personalization being important, making the mnemonic meaningful to you.
Yes, that's crucial. While common mnemonics exist, the most powerful ones are often those you create yourself, linking the word to your own experiences, people you know, or familiar places. That personal connection makes the memory much stronger.
And visualization seems really big with mnemonics.
Oh, definitely. Creating a vivid mental image associated with the word can be incredibly effective. The example given was for the word gargantuan, picturing something truly gigantic, like a huge monster drinking from a tiny cup, or something equally memorable and maybe a bit absurd.
That image sticks because it's unusual.
Exactly. That distinctiveness makes it memorable. It engages your imagination and makes the abstract word feel more concrete.
So mnemonics are like creative shortcuts for memory. And then putting it all together, that Reddit user, Able Organization 607, had a very practical suggestion.
Right, about actually using the new words.
Yeah, they suggested deliberately trying to use new vocabulary in everyday conversations, or even when writing captions for social media posts.
That's a perfect example of active practice in a low-stakes environment. It gets the words out of your head and into real use, reinforcing them and making you more comfortable using them spontaneously.
Okay, we've covered a ton of strategies. But it's important to manage expectations, isn't it? This isn't an overnight process.
Not at all. The 13 Ways article made that clear. Building a substantial vocabulary takes time and consistent effort. You need patience.
So don't get discouraged if you don't feel fluent after a week.
Definitely not. The key is consistency. It's much better to learn, say, 5-10 new words thoroughly each week and actually use them than to try and cram 100 words you'll forget by next Tuesday.
Start small, be consistent, celebrate the progress you make.
Precisely. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Focus on building sustainable habits.
And that Reddit statistic was quite motivating too, wasn't it? About the 3,000 words.
Oh yeah, the TIL post suggesting that knowing the most common 3,000 words in English allows you to understand around 95% of everyday texts.
That makes it feel much more achievable, doesn't it? You don't need to know every word.
Exactly. It shows that focusing your efforts on high-frequency, useful vocabulary gives you a massive return on investment in terms of comprehension and communication ability. It provides a tangible target.
Right. Now, finally, we should probably acknowledge that English isn't always easy. There are challenges beyond just vocabulary.
True. The 13 Ways article touched on challenges like grammar and pronunciation, which have their own complexities, and the Reddit discussion mentioned those seemingly arbitrary rules English sometimes has.
Yeah, sometimes the grammar or spelling just doesn't seem logical.
It can feel that way. The important thing is not to let those complexities derail you. There are tons of resources, online courses, apps, tutors, specifically for grammar and pronunciation.
And focus on the main goal.
Right. The ultimate goal is effective communication. Don't strive for absolute perfection, especially early on. Focus on getting your message across, understanding others, and improving step by step. Progress over perfection.
That's a great mindset to have. Okay, wow, we've really covered a lot of ground here. Should we try and quickly recap the main strategies?
Good idea. So we started with the absolute foundation, reading widely, reading actively, and using accessible resources like graded readers or easy news articles.
Right. Then we moved into active engagement, keeping a vocabulary journal with definitions, synonyms, antonyms, using vocabulary apps for convenient practice, playing word games like crosswords or Scrabble,
and crucially, using flashcards combined with active recall and the power of spaced repetition, using tools like Anki or Hey Llama to review words at optimal intervals for long-term memory.
Then we looked at immersive learning, watching movies and TV shows, listening to podcasts like BBC's 6-Minute Vocabulary, paying attention to context, and actively noting down new words.
Don't forget the essential reference tools, using dictionaries for precise meanings and thesauruses to build connections, and the value of community through things like book clubs or online English learning groups for practice and interaction.
Then came those really specific active learning techniques from GoodNotes, writing questions in your notes, stopping to summarize, using practice questions, pre-testing, the power of teaching others.
And resisting the urge to immediately Google things, forcing that active recall effort first.
And finally, we stress practice, 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 actually using the words, and using mnemonics, acronyms, rhymes, visualizations to create memorable links for better retention.
Plus, setting realistic goals, being consistent, and focusing on communication despite the inevitable challenges of the language.
It really is a multifaceted approach, isn't it? There's no single magic bullet, but rather a combination of strategies you can tailor to your own style.
Exactly. Building that strong vocabulary is an ongoing journey. But By applying these kinds of evidence-based techniques consistently, you really can make significant progress.
And the payoff is huge. Clearer communication, better understanding, more confidence. It impacts so many areas where you use English.
Every new word you learn and can actually use opens up more of the world to you. It's incredibly empowering.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this really deep dive into vocabulary building. We sincerely hope you found these ideas and strategies useful, maybe even inspiring for your own English learning.
Yeah, hopefully you've got some concrete things you can try out.
Definitely. And on that note, here's something to think about. Why not pick just one or maybe two of the techniques we discussed today? Maybe spaced repetition flashcards, or keeping a vocabulary journal, or trying to teach someone a new word and really commit to trying it out over the next week.
Yeah, just focus on one new habit.
See how it feels. Notice if it changes how you learn or remember words. Just a small experiment to see what works for you.
Great suggestion.
And of course, if you found this discussion helpful and you want more deep dives into mastering English, please do subscribe. We'd love to have you with us for future explorations.
Your subscription really helps us keep creating this content.
Thanks again for listening, everyone. We'll catch you in the next deep dive.